Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm Chase Jarvis. Welcome to another episode of the Chase Jarvis Live Show here on CreativeLive. This is where I sit down with the world's top creatives, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders and do my very best to unpack actionable and valuable insights with the goal, the big goal, of helping you live your dreams in career, in hobby, and in your life. My guest today is the Adam Braun.
Good to be here.
It is good.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
I know.
I was remarking to these guys, like, I think it's been almost 2 years since I was actually in your flesh.
Yes.
Not in your flesh? No, since we were in the flesh.
Yeah, you were not in my flesh, but
That would be awkward. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Congratulations. I was remarking before we started rolling the cameras that, I don't know, like 2 weeks ago, I mean, I see your stuff occasionally just because we're in the same friend circle. Yeah. But all of a sudden, Adam was everywhere.
Yeah, that was by design.
You launched a new thing.
Yeah.
Tell us about your thing.
Yeah, so recently launched is MissionU. MissionU is a college alternative for the 21st century. And the real aim, the goal of MissionU is to prepare students for the jobs of today and tomorrow debt-free. We have a fundamentally broken college system, and seeing it through my wife's eyes, it really gave me a pretty firsthand exposure to the other side of what has happened to so many young people in this country that bought into college as the pathway to their dreams and ended up being actually harmed much more than they would helped. And so, after 8 years of Pencils of Promise, I really wanted to focus on education here at home. And MissionU was the creation.
Sweet. We're going to put a pin in that because you mentioned Pencils of Promise. And for those of you who don't know at home, I'm assuming you do, but Adam is the founder and CEO of a nonprofit called Pencils of Promise, which brings education to underserved populations?
Yeah, all across the developing world. Yeah. So I was the CEO for, I guess, 6-7 years.
Yeah.
After, at the time I was 24, turning 25. I'd spent a lot of my early 20s backpacking and traveling through the developing world, and that was really my greatest love at that point in time. And I just had a habit of asking one child in every country that I went through a very simple question. It was, if you could have anything in the world, what would you want most? And they'd write it down on a piece of paper, and I figured I'd have this maybe collage of global interests of children when I got back home and to my dorm room. And in India, this young street beggar said if he could have anything in the world, he'd want a pencil. And so I gave him my pencil. He was so excited about it, and I learned he had never been to school before. And all these other kids started running up like pencil. And after that, as somebody who backpacked through 50, 60 countries in that probably 5 to 7 year period, the one thing I always brought with me was pens and pencils because naturally, actually relatively introverted, but if you go into a rural village or into a market, in Ecuador, and you just sit down with a pen and a pencil and you offer it to a child, not only are they going to engage, but their family's going to engage, their siblings, their parents. And so it was really my way to kind of understand all these local cultures. And then eventually, my grandmother was turning 80. She's a Holocaust survivor, and I really wanted to honor her in her lifetime. At the time, both my grandfathers had all passed away, and I wanted Mom, my grandmother, to know how much she meant to myself and all of us. And I just thought the most powerful way that I could honor her would be to build a school. And I wasn't sure how I would do it, but I'd spent all the time in the communities. I was like, I know that very little money goes a very long way. Uh-huh. And I had all this training from a background in finance, and I was working at Bain in the time. Right now, the #1 rated firm in the world to work by the employees. And so I put $25 in a bank account, and I asked friends to give donations for my birthday to help build one school. $20 for a Halloween party was the start. And we crowdsourced. Now this was late 2008.
Before, there was no such thing.
There was no word. I mean, I remember going around. So you got to keep in mind, it's October of 2008 in New York City, right?
Yeah.
So Lehman Brothers declared bankruptcy 3 weeks before I founded Pencils of Promise. And so everybody's like, wait, you're going to start a charitable organization that's going to help kids on the other side of the world that nobody here has ever met, and you think that's going to work in New York right now? But I'm sure you feel the same way. I find oftentimes the things that people tell you are going to be impossible are the most worthwhile to pursue.
There's a great quote. The person who is unable to do something should stay out of the way of the person who's doing it.
Yeah, I like that.
Something like that.
I like that.
It's
Yeah.
probably better than that. It's my butcher
It sounded
version.
pretty good.
Yeah, but it's so
Yeah.
true. I love that.
And so, I remember explaining to people we're going to use, social media, and at the time Facebook was like still a college kid thing, and I just knew that there was going to be the ability to generate large amounts of small donations, and that we could say yes to young people, that they could participate in great, philanthropic pursuits. And so I remember explaining it to people, and everyone said to me, like, wait, small amount, that's that Obama thing, right? Because there was no word crowdsourcing.
Yeah.
Like, we hadn't actually formed it in our language. It was just an Obama thing because he had just done it in the election, and that was the first time that it was done in mass. And so fortunately, we crowdsourced the money for our first school, and then eventually that became 5 schools, and I obviously left Bain to work on it full time and lead it as CEO. And as of today, we've built more than 400 schools around the world, and we have about 35,000 students in our programs. We do teacher training, we do technology and e-readers in classroom curriculum development, and it's been incredible.
You still on the board? You still involved?
So I'm founder and board emeritus.
Yeah.
One of the things that I also co-led was the search for our new CEO, and that took a year, full year-long search with a firm, 700 candidates before we made an offer. And our new CEO is not so new anymore. He's been there for almost 2 years. Michael has been extraordinary. But one of the things that, and I've kind of coached a lot of other people through executive transition, you can't be on that person's shoulder, right? You kind of have to give them the freedom and flexibility to operate. And so the structure that we realized would be best is for me to be board emeritus, which means I can go to any board meeting that I want, but I'm not sitting there voting.
Yeah.
And I think it was really good for Michael and the leadership to have this space, to not have me kind of hover. And the other thing is I really wanted to work on MissionU. And so it gives me the opportunity to really be deeply involved in the organization, but not in a day-to-day capacity.
Yeah.
And as somebody who was the original blood, sweat, and tears, it's such a nice feeling to not have it on your shoulders,
Yeah.
and instead be so proud of this incredible team, 100 plus people in 5 countries that guide our work every day.
Man, we were trying to reconnect around the last time we spent time together, and I think it was South by Southwest. And at that time, I remember you were still, I think, in the like, deeply involved in Pencils
Oh yeah,
of
I was
Promise.
still the active CEO, and
Yeah.
it was right as the book was coming out.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. The book was
Yeah.
coming out. Many of you probably who are paying attention to this today saw me pushing Adam's book, an incredible book. So yeah, entrepreneur, best-selling author. Now, tech. Would you call yourself tech? Like,
No,
how
not
do you
necessarily.
guys
I mean, I would just say I'm an
orient around
entrepreneur.
MissionU? Yeah.
People have tried to describe MissionU as ed tech.
Yeah.
We're not ed tech.
Yeah.
We're an education model.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a certain paradigm of what college is,
Yeah.
and we're trying to shift that paradigm to include other models. And so I just think of myself as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, it's a strange. We have so many friends in common,
Yeah.
and friends were saying, "Oh, Adam and Scooter," and we had a lot of crossover. But I had no idea that our lives and backgrounds were so similar. Graduate or pre-graduation, world travel.
Yeah.
Student debt was a thing. You mentioned your wife. My wife is a teacher. I've got CreativeLive, which is where we're sitting today.
Yeah.
Same, very, very aligned with disrupting that college isn't for everybody, and that model is outdated. And if we have one job, if our parents had one job, we'll have 5. The next generation will have 5 at the same time. And so how are they going to be equipped? Because the current 4-year model, there's just a lot of overlap. And for the folks at home, like, can you give us the overview? I think I understand the vision really crisply.
But how does it work?
Yeah, but tell us how it works. I'll just let you. That's the intro.
Yeah. So for anyone at home that is curious about MissionU, obviously you can just go to missionu.com and see it all on the website. But to get into more detail, I'll start with what's broken about college, right? And people are pretty familiar with it, but they don't know how dark the numbers actually are.
Can I just say I'm so excited that you're doing this. This is normally like someone says like, tell us how broke the system is, and I'm the one who's naming this. I'm going to borrow some of your statistics here. This is great.
Please.
I'm almost literally going to be taking notes
I'm following
here.
your lead. You've carved a path for people like me to now step into as well.
Help me with the narrative. Keep going.
So there's 2 major things that are broken with college. The first is that the actual curriculum that young people are learning in their undergraduate experience is completely disconnected from what employers actually value. So, 60% of all hiring managers say that college doesn't prepare young people with any of the critical thinking skills necessary to get a job. You and I have probably spoken to hundreds of people that are on the front lines of hiring. And even if you have a degree, it's one signal. 10, 15 years ago, that was the signal, right? It was like if you wanted to hire somebody for your finance department, you looked up what they majored in, and then what grades did they get in stats and microeconomics and macroeconomics, and that's how you learned about them. Now, I don't know anybody that's looked at a college transcript at all in the last 5 years.
I've not even looked at.
I don't even know if anyone's graduated from college that's ever applied for any job that's worked at a company.
I literally have no idea. I've never looked at where a single person I hired went to school, and that's over maybe 200 hires.
Right.
Zero.
Yeah. So we have this system that's been telling all these young people for decades, this is the guaranteed pathway to a better job and a better life ahead. And 91% of all freshmen, it's the number one answer given when asked, why are you going to college? The answer is to get a better job. So young people are seeing college as the path to employment. But colleges see their responsibility in the traditional liberal arts vein to prepare young people for meaning and fulfilling lives and to learn how to learn. And those are all really noble pursuits.
Yeah.
But the problem is that's not what employers are actually demanding out of the skill sets necessary to get that first job and then ultimately to upskill along the way. The second, even bigger issue is that whether or not you finish college, young people are leaving school with insurmountable, absolutely crippling debt. So here's the number that is most shocking to me, and I learned this probably 2 months ago. But what percentage of students that enter a 4-year bachelor's degree program would you believe complete in 4 years?
10%.
So it's 18%.
18%.
18%.
I just go so
Yeah.
low.
Well, I'd prefaced that. I had like maybe led it too heavily. So and you're also way more educated on the space than most.
Yeah,
Most people I ask it to.
$32,900 in student debt, but the average is all stuff.
Most people it's like 50. Like we just assume that the 4-year system actually works, and it doesn't.
Yeah.
So we should stop calling a bachelor's degree a 4-year degree. It's a 6-year degree. So it's about 59% will graduate in 6 years, which is still not great at all.
Yeah.
Right. So that said, as you pointed to, like this year, well, let's just look forward. So we've actually projected it out at MissionU. And the freshman class that just started right now that will graduate in 2020, they will graduate with, on average, 7 in 10 are borrowers. The average borrower will have more than $50,000 of debt. And these are on really high interest rates, as I saw with my wife's situation. She got decimated. So to make a very long story short, what they're learning is broken, not connected to employers, and then the actual cost of it doesn't connect to the value. So at MissionU, we try and solve for these two things. So I'll start with the debt piece. The way our model actually works is that we think institutions of higher education should invest in their students rather than vice versa.
Yeah.
And so we charge no upfront tuition at all. When you get into MissionU, there's zero tuition. We only recuperate any type of kind of payment from a student if and when they are successful. So the way our program works is we invest in you for a full year. It's a 1-year program. And then at the end of that year, only when you're making $50,000 or more, you contribute 15% of income back to MissionU for 3 years. So it's really essentially on our shoulders to work with you side by side. It has to be collaborative, as all education must be, to get you to a place where you're making a great wage. And if you don't, then you end up not owing us anything. So we're changing that piece of the model. And then the second is the actual curriculum. We start with employers first.
Yeah.
And so, we've had hundreds of employer conversations, and we say, what are the skills that you value? What are the jobs that you're looking to fill in the next, 3 to 5 years? And, we build what we call employer partners. So they deeply advise us on curriculum. We make sure that we're calibrating, our needs to them.
Yeah.
And then on the back end, we give them early access to our top graduates to consider for hiring.
Sure.
And so right now, we have employer partners like Spotify, Lyft, Warby Parker, Uber, Casper, Harry's, on down the line.
Yeah, great tech companies
so,
that are
a lot of companies that, when
thinking.
I spend a lot of time with 19 to 25-year-olds and I say, what are the companies that you want to work for most? Yeah. And then we went out and said, okay, what do you look for in hiring? So it's a 1-year program. About 90% of it happens online, but it's not pre-recorded lectures. These are live synchronous, virtual classrooms essentially with industry practitioners. Much like you guys are, broadcasting all over the place right now. But we think it's really important to essentially replace that college experience, that you're close enough that you can meet with your cohort. Yeah. So you're in a 25-student cohort, and you come together for a 3-day orientation in every month, either on company campuses, college campuses, or co-working spaces. And our first major that we launched with right now is data analytics and business intelligence. But the whole year is kind of crafted around hard skills, soft skills, a little bit of the coming of age of college.
Sure. Well, if you need any content, we've built a lot of it from the
I
ground
know,
up by
no.
the same industry practitioners. We're
Yeah.
happy to collaborate with you on that.
For sure. I mean, that's part of our vision is to recognize that you don't need to reinvent the wheel, that there are people like you guys that have created incredible content,
Yeah.
and we want our students learning from that content. So my guess is by the time that somebody listens to this, and sees an actual student starting at MissionU, and we opened up admissions in March of 2017. Our first cohort starts in September and then continues basically on trimesters after that. My gut tells me that they'll be taking some CreativeLive courses.
By all means, open door policy. So I want to go down a few different angles. So one is and I think this will probably appeal to a couple different cross-section of our listeners or watchers. One is the sort of the mission and vision, and how'd you figure out what you want to do? Because there's so many people who are watching or sitting in jobs they don't love, or what I've talked a lot about is my own personal experience with the cultural pressure of doing X, Y, and Z to be considered successful. So that,
Totally.
And so how you made that jump. Another angle that I'd like to pursue is the startup solopreneur turning into an entrepreneur, where you're out here in Silicon Valley now. You're in the major leagues, so presumably you raise some money.
Yeah.
And so that'll maybe tap into the entrepreneurial side of the audience. And then there's the one that is actually sort of the learning. Like, what are some of the things that you stand behind? What are some of the, what values does MissionU and you personally stand for? Is it creativity? Is it innovation? Is it the soft skills you mentioned? All those things are really intriguing to me, given that we have, I was told, oh my God, you're going to build all your own content from the ground up, you're stupid. 5 years ago that was stupid. Right. Today, genius.
Yeah.
Focusing on creativity and innovation and the commingling of IQ and EQ.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so stupid, that's outdated. It needs to be, just super smart, and everybody wants to be a programmer.
Right.
Now, again, genius.
Yeah,
so
why aren't we doing software engineering?
Right.
Which we're not doing.
Right. So I want to explore each of those three tangents, and we'll go back to the first one first. So how did you, you were in Pencils of Promise, arguably something you built from the ground up that was, filled a certain part of your soul that was very enriching, and yet at some point there was a voice inside, and I think, I feel like we crossed paths and maybe had over a beer. Yeah,
it was right.
It was right in that time
the
frame.
The seed was being planted right around the time that we were together. So, I think part of it was writing a book. So after writing The Promise of a Pencil, the book did really well and it became really big. And so it's been used on a lot of college campuses as the common read. So oftentimes when that happens, I'll go to that college and I'll speak at that college. And it's crazy. There's not a lot of stuff that really emotionally moves me because there's been so much emotional greatness in the work of Pencils of Promise, and I've certainly cried my eyes out many a times in the field at a school opening or meeting a family. But domestically, it's a little bit tougher. But I'll tell you, going to some of these colleges, I remember going to St. Bonaventure or Arizona State, where they were using the book as the common read, and every kid basically created an art piece around the book, and one girl literally did basically a piece of art that was an image of one of our first students, a girl named Newt, who I know very well, but it was done out of pencil etchings, right? And she gave it to me framed. It was so moving and just powerful. And so I really came to love spending time on college campuses, because that's why I started Pencils of Promise. Was the college version of me didn't have an organization that said yes, you should be involved. And so I was spending time on college campuses, and I was trying to really get these students excited and involved in Pencils of Promise. But there was always one question that they would ask me that I would dread, because I'm sure you've spoken in front of audiences plenty of times, and there's the same 5 questions come up, right? And you're like, all right, ask me something different besides these same 5. And for Pencils of Promise, it was, how do you choose your schools? How do you find your teachers? How do you ensure that the schools continue to operate? And right now, 400 plus schools, 100% are open and operational. But there was one question in there that was, what about our problems here at home? That was the one question that I never had a good answer for. It was, it's great what you're doing internationally, but I'm getting crushed with student debt right now. Is there anything you can do here? And my answer was always not really, because an organization should focus on where it can be most effective, and we focus on international rural poverty in the developing world. And then I met my wife, and everything really changed, because it wasn't just about my journey, it was about the shared journey of this person who I was creating a life with. And my wife came to this country when she was 9 from South Africa, loving family, but without much financial means. And they really bought into that belief that college is the way to the American dream and a better future. She went to college for about 2.5 years, and in those 2.5 years, racked up so much debt, had so much financial hardship that she needed to leave early. She's one of 31 million Americans with some credit and no bachelor's degree, but that debt stays with you. And hers continued to grow because her interest rates were so high, even though she was paying somewhere between $300 and $700 a month every month.
A month. And most people don't know that is not forgivable through bankruptcy either.
Well, that's what I didn't know.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So she had $110,000 of student debt when we met, with no bachelor's degree. And we're moving towards like marriage. And I said, look, I want to marry you. You should declare bankruptcy and be absolved of this decision you made when you were 17. And at least when we get married, I have clean credit, so you can start fresh. And she said, Adam, it doesn't work like that. And I was like, I have a finance background. Let me figure this out. You can get out of anything, right? And that's when I learned that she was right. I mean, it's the only debt in the United States you cannot declare bankruptcy on, and it's with you for life. Not only that, if she left the country, or if she, something bad happened to her, they would go after her family, because usually if you come from low income or working class family, your family needs to co-sign on your student loan, so they'll go after them. When I learned that, it was so infuriating to me, and such a massive societal injustice that I literally could not process that I was spending all this time internationally and I wasn't able to help create an impact on the person who was literally sitting next to me on the couch.
And there's the gross part, which is that the country makes a ton of money.
Oh yeah, huge amounts of money.
Yeah, there is this sort of the overt, outwardly facing script of supporting education, make it easy to get a Pell Grant and this grant.
Yeah, but we make so much money on the interest that it funds other programs that there's not a real political incentive to change the system.
There's zero. The incentives are not aligned at all to renovate the system.
Yeah. So I was really seeing the world through my wife's eyes and realizing that my situation was actually the exception, and hers was closer to the norm rather than what I believed was vice versa. Once I just started looking up the data, and it was like, oh my God, this system is really broken.
Yeah.
And thinking about having kids in the future and building a family, college is supposed to be the one thing that creates less divide between the haves and have-nots and allows for social mobility, and it's actually making our society more fractured.
Yeah.
And you have things like the recent election where it was like, regardless of where you stood, you were the opposite of everybody else on the other side of the country, and college should be the thing that allows for gray in between, right? So that was really the impetus. I think the other thing was just, it's important for every person, in particular entrepreneurs, to just know who and what you are and recognize with a growth mindset that you can evolve, but there are certain parts of you that you just know where you thrive. And I like starting stuff. I thrive in the chaos and the ambiguity of the early stages. We were just talking about,
before you came to the interview, about picking up a rug for the floor of the new office. Like, you got to go screw desks, legs to tables.
I mean, we had somebody start about a month ago, and he came to us from Bain, right? I mean, world-class employer, incredible talent guy. And I sent him an email on Sunday, and I said, just so you know, when you get to the office on Monday, the first thing you need to do is build your desk. And I said, it's a rite of passage, because it's what we had to do, not all that long ago. And I like that, like, he's got to roll up his sleeves and get his hands a little dirty. And once you've done something like that, you realize, okay, this is startup mode, right? And fortunately, we have a lot of stuff that immediately accelerates us past the traditional kind of startup phase. Yeah. But I wanted to build something again, and that's just where I thrive. And I wanted to do something that also, was going to potentially impact my children, because right after I moved to the Bay Area about a year ago, and this is maybe where we can kind of segue into that second topic, my wife became pregnant, and now we have newborn twins.
You look great for newborn twins. I don't know how you're doing it, but you look great.
Yeah, I mean, I was telling you beforehand what my friend recently reached out after watching this video that we used in our launch, right? It's this really great video with founders of a ton of incredible companies, really talking about how they're struggling to find great talent and how MissionU is a really great pipeline that they would want to hire out of. And my friend who did the musical score looked at it and called me and was like, we need to talk about this video. You don't come off very well. And I was so concerned, like,
what did I do?
Oh my God, did I say the wrong thing? Do I sound, like a jerk? I don't want to go in and reshoot this. We didn't have time. We were launching in a day. And he was like, no, you don't look your best. Like, you look like a dad of twins who hasn't slept in a few months. And I was like,
funny.
oh, of course, man. That is how I am. This is real. This is real. So, I mean, one other important data point that really hit me hard, Forbes put out a study where they projected out what the expected cost of college will be in 2030. And my children will go to college in the 2030s. But in 2030, the expected cost of 1 year at a private college is projected to be just over $130,000 for the year. And that's post-tax money, right, for a family? I mean, when we're moving towards that place, there's no chance that college is going to be able to be that great equalizer that we want it to be. And now with 2 kids, and anybody who has kids realizes if you have multiple, they're not the same at all. They're total opposites already, just in a few months. And if one of my kids wants to go down the traditional path and they can get into a school where the overall return on that investment is probably going to be there, I'd encourage them. But I want other choices for the other one who might say I don't buy into this traditional. And I'm going to, of course, encourage them to really always challenge the norms. So in a lot of ways, MissionU is ultimately being built for kind of the institution I would want one of my kids to attend.
How hardcore are you about throwing rocks at the existing system? Because I find, this is me asking you, without the cameras rolling at all, because I'm a product of that.
Right.
My wife has several degrees. We both had student debt, despite I was on a soccer scholarship and still came out with some student debt. So I have a little bit of a personal bone to pick.
Yeah.
I felt a bunch of societal pressure to live up to the false narrative that if you go to this school, then you're going to get a good job, and that the data is unequivocal that if you went to these 13 or 16 schools, you're disproportionately likely to get hired into one of these very discrete professions. Otherwise, if you get into that second tier of colleges, the middle 50%, it's basically all the same.
Yeah.
So I tend to try and be a positive person because I'd rather put good energy into the world.
Right.
But it's very hard when I'm standing in either on a show or in front of stages or on stages in front of a lot of people. I'm keynoting at the ASU education.
ASU JC.
Yeah. So I'm trying to decide how many rocks to throw.
Yeah.
And you're a great barometer. So what's your POV on that?
I think we're similar in that we would much rather put out a message of positivity and aspiration to any room that we're in rather than one of doomsday scenario, right? It's just not how either one of us thrives.
Yeah.
But there comes a moment where you recognize that if there isn't some shock applied to this system, that it's the amount of negativity that's going to result from that silence is something that I can't bear to stand.
It is. It's almost the complacence. If you're not vocally against it, then you're for it. And
Right.
There's so much. It is the data that's how I try and live that truth for myself. Just here are the facts.
Yep.
It was a couple years ago. It was 32,900, and you're saying by 2020 it's going to be 50,000.
Yep.
It's clearly growing faster than inflation, faster than any other sort of cost of living metric that we have. So I try and lead with stats. But what about what are some of the?
I would say one of the things that's just very true for me is I came out of the system really benefiting.
Yeah.
So, I went to Braun, had a great college education. Fortunately, my parents worked themselves out of their debt, paid down college into their 40s and 50s, were a dentist and an orthodontist, and saved up enough for me to be able to go to 4 years of undergrad, and then basically said, you're going to be on your own. You're going to have 4 years of college. You go to grad school. You take you'll be on your own, but we'll save up for 4 years.
Yep.
And so I can't say that all college is bad. What I can say is that the bachelor's degree, in my mind, is a harmful construct to society. Yeah. The notion that it's a one-size-fits-all system and that everyone has to go get this thing as a mark of validation to get a job is wrong. And that we need more choices. Some students should just take courses on CreativeLive because they need certain skills in complement to the work experience they're going to have, to the traveling, the life experience. Yep. Other students, they want that coming of age, and maybe they have a family that can help support them through it, or they can get grants and financial aid. But I'm not willing to say that all college is bad, because I think a lot of college is great.
Sure.
But college, especially a bachelor's degree, I think a bachelor's degree in particular does not work for most people, and most people should be looking at other alternatives.
Yeah, and there's another, the construct of school, both both like K-12 and higher education, the constructs that people are not aware of that those are based on is the factory.
Yeah.
Which is literally putting
The
raw
Prussian
material.
model.
Yeah, it's Prussian factory. You put it in at one end. Things need to move through the factory at the
Ring the
same
bell,
pace.
get 'em on the
ring the
next
bell
one.
at the right time, and then
Yeah.
they come out and they should have a similar body of knowledge that they can all be tested against. And obviously, that may have worked for the Industrial Revolution, where it wasn't where you were going to get a job and have a job for 40 years, and then you're going to get the gold watch and sail on into your retirement. The fact that that's not true anymore, the fact that we're still building the system on something that was from the 1800s, and the other paradigm is the farm. Like the reason we had summers off is so you could literally harvest the food. And I don't know about your friends, but I don't have that many farmer friends anymore.
No, just a couple.
Yeah, just a couple. And
Not
bless
many,
them, they're
though.
amazing. But
like guys from Iowa. a
yeah,
couple other
exactly.
places.
But by and large, we're
we're moving
living in
away
this
from that.
model that is still mired in that old thinking.
Yep.
It's horrible.
Yeah, definitely.
What's keep going on my 1, 2, 3 questions. I don't know
Okay,
if
so
you-
the second one was really about kind of transitioning probably from nonprofit over to, we're a public benefit corporation, so allows us to raise traditional venture capital, serve our social mission, and it's been interesting and great so far.
Yeah.
As much as I love the work of Pencils of Promise, there was this feeling of at times being limited because we had to fit into the expectations of everybody else. Right? Like there's just this perception that when you're building a nonprofit, you just can't do certain things, right? I was talking to somebody this morning and I was talking to them about just how much I think of myself as like a marketer in general, right? But then you start to build a venture-backed company and you realize, okay, well there's brand marketing and there's growth marketing. And I'm a brand marketer because I could never spend donor dollars on like paid acquisition channels, even though it might actually yield more donations and more social good that we could put in the world, but we could never like optimize. We had to get a Google AdWords grant and then use whatever we could with the free kind of AdWords we had. Yeah. So I think building a company out of New York, where I was for the last almost decade, and then now doing it in the Bay Area is incredibly different. The cultures are super different. And I think of myself as like a New Yorker with probably the interests of a Bay Area person, right? Like I'm interested in how do I really improve the world, and New York tends to be obviously very driven by like how do you make more money than the person
how do I improve
next to you?
myself?
Yeah. But I move at the pace of a New Yorker, right? And I just come to see like there's a directness about me that I don't mind telling somebody to their face the truth if it's going to improve their well-being. I'm not ever going to be mean to somebody for the case, just to be mean to them. But I was excited about kind of coming out to the West Coast with like my sharp, kind of knives in my pockets and being able to build something with people that I find out here are really interested in how do you improve the well-being of the world, and kind of that intersection that you also live in, which is that kind of space between technology and education is super exciting. And the team that we've built already is extraordinary. My co-founder is just an incredible both educator as well as software engineer. And also an entrepreneur himself in his own right, and it's been super exciting, just kind of creating something from the ground up in a new culture entirely.
Yeah, are you at all trepidatious around the term entrepreneur? I identified as an artist my whole life, and then when I started a company that would support creatives and entrepreneurial endeavors, but to call myself an entrepreneur felt a little bit anachronistic or antithetical to my true soul, because that felt trendy. And now I can't really escape. I'm right in the middle of the trend of every talented person I know, not everyone, but a lot of them are running off and starting companies because how do you sort of fit in and or escape? How do you identify or disidentify with that?
I identify with it because it's just who I am.
Yeah, I'm a builder too. Like
but I would say like you got to the place that you felt confident building because like you had this incredible gift and talent around photography, right? I don't really possess that. I have a great ear for music. I'm an incredible appreciator. I have no skill at all. When you throw like a guitar in my hands, I can play 4 chords and then I'm done.
Or you got 3 chords on me though.
Fair enough. But for as long as I can remember, I've just been starting businesses. I was the kid who in 7th grade was organizing the NCAA March Madness bracket in every school that I ever attended. I was the one who was, organizing like poker games at my camp and, taking a rake before like that was acceptable, right? Collecting basketball cards and realizing that I wanted Jordan cards, that they were the most expensive. And Beckett's magazine was this magazine that every month put out the value of every card that came out. And you could literally watch like the appreciation and depreciation of cards. And so I started collecting cards, and soon like I probably had 50 plus Michael Jordans because I just knew how to trade better than my friends could. So I always started things. I started a basketball camp in college that became the largest one in my county and paid for all of my backpacking travels. That's how I paid for everything is lessons that became a camp and a business.
Yeah.
And so,
so
I
the
think
DNA is there without the label.
Right. I mean, I wish that I identified more as a writer because I love it so much. When people are like, oh, you're going to write a book, anyone who knew me had been asking me for a decade because they had been reading my writings that I'd been doing as I traveled through my early 20s. But for me, it almost feels like, I don't want to say disingenuous, but it feels hard like when I go to a dinner, people are like, tell me what you do, to be like, oh, I'm an author, right? Like I really identify as an entrepreneur. I'm just someone who likes to build stuff. Yeah. I think what got really trendy and probably felt similar to how you felt was when social entrepreneur became this kind of bubble in, call it 2010, 11, 12, and it was around Blake and Tom Shoes really blowing up, and suddenly everybody wanted to be like, I'm going to create good and double bottom line, and Pencils of Promise was blowing up, and so all the time I was kind of like bucketed with this, there was a group of us, Scott Harrison at Charity Water, Neil Blumenthal at Warby.
These are all mutual friends of ours.
All close friends, and all extraordinary people, but I think we were all aware that like this is a hot, trendy thing, and I don't think any one of us, if you said, "What are you?" would say I'm a social entrepreneur. It's just like we're an entrepreneur, and what we're interested in happens to have a mission behind it that improves the world, as well as for some of the businesses, returns capital.
Well, for all those people, my experience of knowing them and other folks that were caught up in that bubble, the conversations that we would have over dinner were like, we're scratching our own itches. These are things that we actually care about. And if someone else is labeling, then that's just a manifestation of their own label.
Yeah. But it has been interesting. I mean, another mutual friend of ours, Gary Vee, he talks a lot about, and it's the truth. Like when I see the clips he puts out, I'm like, it's true. There are a lot of people who want to be an entrepreneur. It's just not in their DNA. It's just not who they are. And it's one of those things where I see people talking about being an entrepreneur, and then they don't put in the work. They don't like have these sleepless nights that I'm sure you and I have where, I was interviewing somebody to work at MissionU last week, and I started talking about culture. And I was like, I'm very deliberate about culture. And she said, no, I want to be an early stage, company. And I was like, do you?
Yeah.
Do you know what that means? Do you know what it means to eat stress for a living? Like, do you know what it means to literally risk it every single day? When you wake up in the morning, you feel like this thing could live or die based on the effort that you're willing to put into it. And that, it doesn't leave when like you turn off your email or when you leave the office, that it's just a part of who and what you are. Yeah. And there are people who are like, oh, I want to like get an article written about me as an entrepreneur or some company, and they don't have the work ethic, and they don't have the drive that creates the work ethic, right? And that's what I worry about sometimes, is the notion that a lot of people have seen individuals in particular in the Bay Area make so much money so quickly because they started a mobile app and that mobile app blew up and never generated any revenue or did, any real trend. Like I would meet people all the time and they'd be like, oh, what do you do? And I'd say, years ago, I'm running Pencils of Promise. And they'd be like, cool. I have a mobile app. And I was like, oh, okay. Do you guys charge anything? No. And I'd be like, oh, so you're a nonprofit. And they'd be like, what do you mean? I'd be like, well, we generate millions of dollars a year, and we're called a nonprofit, but you're actually a nonprofit because like you have no ambition,
no dollars
to make dollars. And every time they kind of look at me a little bit confused, but over time, what I saw is there were certain people who really just like there's a cadence, to just a conversation with them, and it wasn't what they were trying to be; it was just who they are. One of my mentors is a guy, Dan Rosenzweig, who's the CEO of Chegg.
Of course.
And yeah, so Dan gives a talk every year that I've referenced to a lot of people when he gives it, I think, at the New School or one of the colleges in New York. And he basically says, look, there's three types of people. There's founders who like love the early stage, all ideas, chaos, et cetera. There's entrepreneurs who build through that kind of like rapid growth part. And then there's executives who are really important to, optimizing once you're at a certain point. And it's okay to be one of those three and recognize that sometimes you might play a different part. But I think there's definitely a lot of people right now who like want to be the founder, entrepreneur, but it's just not necessarily who they are, and that's okay.
That's what I'm trying to caution against, is the same thing that we were told, that you have to go to school to go to a great school, then get a great job. The new sort of paradigm that I'm trying to keep people aware of is, hey, you don't want to start a business unless you want to eat, breathe, sleep, this thing. And where we have 2 really senior positions open here right now, CreativeLive, not analogous to what you were just saying. I was interviewing someone not too long ago, within the last 2 weeks. Same story, like I really want to leave this fill-in Fortune 100 company where they're a senior director with, I came in and fathomed their salary.
Right.
And like, I really want to come, get my hands dirty. I'm like, you actually understand what get your hands dirty is at a startup where you're like less than 200 people versus you're at a company that has 150,000 people in it. Like the get your hands dirty at Apple or Microsoft or Yahoo or any of these giant companies is so different. I mean,
it is.
You're telling your guy to put his desk together. Like, that's
literally
entirely different.
Yeah.
So let's continue to protect that narrative. I don't want people to stumble into this thing. It's not for the light of heart.
Well, I mean, one thing that I think is really cool, though, is...
Mixed metaphor, sorry.
Yeah. We'll blend them all.
Yeah.
I think one thing that's cool, though, is, there's been so much talked about, written about the Millennial Generation, right? Which I'm a part of. We were basically the first. So, I was class of 06 in college. I was Zuckerberg's year. I was at Braun. He's at Harvard. Sophomore year, Facebook starts, and it's like our class, their class, one of the first 10 schools. So we were like the first ones to be called this millennial thing and took a lot of pride in like, we're different, right? And now you have, call it a 15-year band. It goes down to about 18-year-olds. But what I'm excited about is actually the generation behind, right? The 5 to 18-year-olds. They are so dynamic. Yeah. I mean, they're first of all, they're obviously digital natives. They know nothing but the internet. And they're makers, like they really build stuff. And so
they want to do all of the pieces themselves, or at least know enough to be able to talk.
And they kind of question everything, right? It's like, when somebody just kind of asks them, to do this, there's almost this inherent like why, right? And a lot of times that's kind of leaves us when we're 5 or 6 years old. Like I haven't entered that phase with my newborns, but I'm sure very soon, like everything I say is just gonna be like, why? But there's a curiosity there, right? And we kind of lose that, and oftentimes school is the thing that kind of takes it away, because it's like sit still, pay attention, and that's obviously not particularly healthy for a child's development. But I think this generation, I'm just super excited about it. Like, I feel like a lot of people with age, you become skeptical of the generation behind you. I couldn't be more excited about 5 to 18-year-olds. And it's also why things like CreativeLive and MissionU make so much sense, because they're questioning that traditional path and they need new opportunities to learn.
And let's just say we owe them that explanation, because we're proceeding without the consistent reminder of why we're doing something. We talk about why a lot around here. Simon Sinek's speech. Yeah. Like we talk about you need to be able to connect with the work you do so that you find it meaningful. Because if you don't find it meaningful, you're going to give half, 2/3 your person to the work that you want to do. So I think there's also this, while we're talking about that generation, there's this built-in empathy that I've never seen before. And I think for all of the bad rap that the internet gets, the connection, to be able to see, Scott Harrison build wells in Africa and watch that live in real time and see what the work that you do, what impact it can have. Like there's this empathy layer that I don't see in the millennial generation, that this group, I have a bunch of friends who have like 10, 12, 14, 16-year-olds, just they have it in spades. It's beautiful.
Well, I'll tell you the other interesting thing, which is kind of hopefully an indication of kind of the wind being at our backs in the work that we're taking on, is there's a big Fast Company article recently about this 4,000 student survey that was done. It's the first major survey of Gen Z or Centennials or whatever people are going to call them. And one of the questions that was asked is, what are you most concerned about? Like, what's the number one concern? And in particular, it was high school students, right? And I think back to high school and like, it was maybe you don't get into the right college, or you're bullied by somebody, or like your sports team doesn't do well, or someone's not interested in like dating you, or like maybe they want to date you and like that's scary, in general. But the number one answer that was given amongst that generation of what they're most concerned about, I think it was like 66%, was drowning in college debt. That was the number one answer. And it was because they've seen their siblings, right? They've seen millennials go out with the belief that we were fed around college, and then end up coming home and living with mom and dad. It's like some insane number, like a third of all millennials live at home right now. I mean, and it shouldn't be that way, right?
Yeah.
But I think that this generation that's coming up is really wise to the fact that college doesn't have to be the only way that you can get ahead in life. And I think the work that you guys have done and continue to do is a large reason for that. So I commend you.
Well, this is about you. We're going to try and do what we can to focus on you. I appreciate the kind words, but I think we are all in this together.
Yeah,
And that's the
totally.
thing that I guess another piece of that debt is that what folks at home who are listening to this and thinking that we're throwing rocks at a system that you still believe strongly in, again, we're not disparaging it for the sake of disparaging it. It's just that there are many other paths, and that the path that you were sold, it's a different bill of goods than it was some time ago. So
Yeah, I
there's
think
this
that's hard
evolution.
I mean, even my sister-in-law, she's 26, so she went to college relatively recently. Now she went for a year and racked up a bunch of debt and financial hardship and had to leave, right? And paid that down for the next eight years or so, right?
If she's lucky, 8 years probably.
Yeah,
right?
I think she had like 15 grand of debt from
that's
like one semester and a half or something like that. But I won't name the school, but it's not an elite school. It's not a bad school. It's just like that big kind of middle,
Yep.
bucket of several thousand schools that are names, but not a name that an employer is going to look at and say, oh my gosh, I have to hire that person. And I asked her, what do you think the cost of your school is today? And she said, I don't know. I mean, it was probably like 32,000 when I went, so maybe 36 or 38 now. And I looked it up, and that same school today is $56,000 a year. And so I think it's hard for, especially parents, right, like baby boomers and whatnot, to understand how out of control it's got.
Yeah, how it's outpacing every other growth metric.
Yeah.
I think, God, what did I wanted to say something else about.
Oh, you were asking me, the third one was like what we stand for at MissionU.
Yeah. So, like, why don't you layer your values into? I mean, we've been picking them up all along, but like layer your values into MissionU. Just.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Wholesale.
the first one is purely the notion that education should be a tool for individual advancement, right? That inherently, when you commit to your education, that it should somehow improve your opportunities in life. And that at all times is like our kind of, true north, if you want to call it that, as an institution, is if we're not ultimately serving student interests and we're focused on something like institutional preservation or just making sure that like we're keeping the lights on, then we should be frankly closed down, right? And there's probably a lot of colleges that I feel that way about right now. I think at our core, the purpose of MissionU is to ensure that learning transforms into livelihood. That's something that I really believe in. Having spent a decade focused on education in the developing world, the other kind of, like hand that fits interlocked with that hand of kind of core education is opportunity for dignified work. Because you can give somebody great educational, opportunities, but it's almost like cruel to have somebody who's educated and then can't transfer that into some dignified work and livelihood. And you see it all the time in the developing world, where people, get better education opportunities, but then there's not a work opportunity for them there. And then you also are starting to see it now in like the charter school movement here in the US, where if you speak to any leader of a charter school, the one metric they constantly point to of success is we have 99% college placement, right? 97% of our kids from really tough backgrounds get into college. And that's this huge accomplishment, right? And you can't expect them to do all things. But if you sit with them, you say, hey, how do those kids do in college? How many of them finish college? How many of them leave with more debt than they entered? The numbers are bleak, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it's not great, And so, that connection that we really want to make is to enable any person, regardless of their background or kind of, the financial status that they come from, to have that opportunity to ensure that their learning really transforms into livelihood.
This is a pain point for me, and I don't know if you've experienced it, so I'll share. And there's a little bit of name dropping in here, so just bear with me for the folks at home who are listening to this. And it is, same thing, very passionate about the non-traditional path. I think it's the first time in the history of the world that it's more risky to do the traditional thing. And I've, said that proudly. And then through the last, 4 years, I got involved with the Obama administration and got to, work closely at the White House. Education's a huge thing for the former First Lady. And the what was painful for me is there was this sort of acknowledgement, we need to recognize that, lifelong learning or, continued learning is great, but they kept pointing back to this stat, which is the best identifier that we have, the best metric for an improved life or a life that where you make above the average household income is a college degree.
College completion.
And so there's this, it's because it is a thing that is, that you can hang some data on.
Yeah. Well, one thing that's important there is it's historic data.
Yeah.
It's past.
Yeah.
Right? And I
Looking
would agree
backwards,
with it.
for sure. You could,
Up until probably 2-3 years ago, maybe even. Maybe, you can make an argument 5 years ago, whatever it was. Yeah, it was the best thing you could do. Going forward, the cost structure and then the way that employers look at it, I would challenge that. The other thing that anybody can call out is like how much of that is kind of the person who would go out and is going to do well in life is obviously the same family that encourages their kid to go to college. So, it's so hard to like pull out, some of the difference between the kind of signal and the noise there. Yeah. But it has been something that's been harped on a lot.
It's my fear that you and I are then now competing with these voices, and the first lady, the former first lady, she tells a great story about that's what got her out of the south side of Chicago.
Yeah.
In a position
and
where
they're great.
Great couple.
Where it happens.
It's incredible, but there's this, because it's something you can point to that's very. It's very well formed. It's very obvious. It's not murky or fudgy or whatever. That we still, as a culture, continue to point to. So if you're a parent or you're yourself thinking about going back to school or what should you do for your kids, you have to, I think, listen to Adam and others like him when there's more behind the numbers than just the numbers, and it's sort of like the difference between. Vegas takes into consideration all of the odds as opposed to Nate Silver, for example, just looking at the polls. Yeah. And you got to take all these signals into consideration. And this one that you're talking about employability, going to employers like the Lyfts and the Airbnbs and the Spotify's, the folks that were folks at the company. That is an indication of what the future is going to bring.
Yeah.
All right, switching gears. You're a father.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Twins. Unexpected.
Double the fun, half the sleep. I don't think I've ever even used that phrase.
That's a good one, though.
It feels so true.
Well, you really do look great. I know some people that have kids, and you look better.
They've been very kind. The last month, they've been sleeping through the night.
Oh, wow.
So we get them down, around 7:30ish, and then usually my son Dylan starts screaming. This morning he was screaming around 5 or so, but usually he gives us till about 6 before he starts.
Oh man,
making
that's
some
luxurious.
Noise. Oh yeah, it is. I mean, it's one of those things where you hear so much about it and you think, whatever. They're describing it this way, and I'm sure it'll feel that way. And you can't describe obviously the love that you have for your children. But I think the unexpected piece was just how much it changes your view on the world in general. Not just like this relationship that I have with this thing that I would do absolutely anything for, but I mean, the two things that have changed most for me are my priorities. Like the way I treat my time is now very different, and my sense of purpose. Because my purpose up until Dylan and Bela, our twins, were born, was very much like, how could I impact as many people as I could in a meaningfully positive way? That was my main driver of call it self-worth, of success, was how do I make this really meaningful impact on the world by virtue of impacting as many people as I can in a deep,
very simple way of measuring it.
Yeah. And then probably the 2 weeks after they were born and they were in the NICU because they came early and my wife had some challenges as well, and then I finally brought everybody home from the hospital, and I was like, I don't care about anything except for being in that room, just the four of us. And I don't care if in fact, another person for as long as I live, as long as us four are happy and healthy together. And suddenly this desire to live very big became a desire to live as small as possible. And it was really, a couple of weeks of reconciling that before I started to see them, mature and evolve and start to like recognize their hands and start to, observe objects. And I was like, oh no, they're going to go out into the world. And now these two things intersect in that, I have this responsibility to still impact as many people as positive as I can, but the core motivation for that is to enable the best world possible for these two to live in. And that shift in thinking was really unexpected.
That small thinking is a very powerful vehicle.
Yeah.
And you realize that this is the thing that you want to impact, this thing that you can touch and feel and see. And I think that's part of why those big narratives are, or college as something you can point at is very tricky, because you can still point at and touch it. But when you go back to your child, that your child is going to have to go into that world without, I guess, with a bunch of different disadvantages that we didn't experience, because it's going to be such a different ecosystem in 3030.
Yeah.
Wait, 2030.
2030.
I just skipped 1,000 years there. Bad math.
Then it'll be really
I have no
different.
excuse. I don't have twins.
Then it'll be really
I got
different.
plenty of sleep.
I mean, I think the other thing that was really unexpected for me was just in that shift in priorities was, for a long time I kind of thought like, you need to make money to support your family, right? And in the town that I grew up in, where again, my dad's a dentist, my mom's an orthodontist, but it was, where a lot of like hedge fund managers and stuff lived about an hour outside of New York. I had a lot of friends whose parents weren't very present, but they were incredibly successful by every mark that society would deem. And now I look at that and I'm like, look, there's only one thing you can't buy with money, and that's time, right? Like you can buy freedom, you can buy great medical health. You can't buy back the time that you have in your life, and in particular, that time that you have with your friends, with your family, with perhaps your children. And so that's one thing that's hit me really hard lately is like, I don't care about X, Y, or Z if it is not somehow if it's going to take me away from my children, it has to be worth so much to me at this stage, because the dollars and cents I recognize can't buy back that time. And that's been a recognition that I wish more people saw, because I see so many people like, oh, I just need to make more money because then I could buy my kids this nicer car. And it's like, yeah, but your kid just wants you around. And again, I have 4.5 months of experience with twins, so
You sound wise.
So I'm like nobody to give a parent advice, but I think it's just something for friends of mine that I've had these deep conversations with that aren't parents yet, where I'm like, look, just know that when they come, yes, you'll be motivated to financially do well enough to take care of them, but you also won't want to be away from them.
I'm going to see if you can reconcile something for me, because I get asked a lot about balance, and I don't. First of all, defining success, very nebulous thing.
Right.
To each his or her own.
And it's affected by relativity.
Yeah, for
it's
sure.
Essentially, who do you consider your peers?
Yeah.
And if you're ahead of them, you feel successful, and if you're not, then you feel like a failure.
Yeah, regardless.
Yeah, it's just about how you define your peer set.
What the bank account is. So let's put a pin in that for a second. And I have advocated for the idea that balance is impossible. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it's controversial or not. I think Gary has also said the same thing before. And you go back to our friends who were at big tech companies, living a very secure life, thinking, oh, I want to come and be an entrepreneur or build a startup, work on a company with less than 100 people, make some great impact. But the sacrifice is massive.
Yep.
And I don't feel oriented towards balance with respect to my family, my personal life. I have actually had a different approach where I'm trying to blend the things that I care about into something where when I'm feeding one, I'm feeding the other.
Yeah,
or I can at least step out and sip some air. And it doesn't feel like balance. Something that it was in the way that you said it made me feel like that when you can think of your kids in the way that you do and you want to be in that room. But is that balance? Do you feel like you have it? Or will you ever have it? Or
no,
are you out of whack just like the rest of us?
I think the pursuit of balance is one in which you will never ultimately be successful if you're actually pursuing something really, really difficult or extraordinary. If you want to stay in that kind of ordinary, and I don't mean extraordinary and special, it's just not ordinary, beyond ordinary. Yeah. Ordinary, you can maintain balance. You can say all right, I'm going to go to my job from 9 to 5 and I'm going to be with my kids before and after, and that's totally fine for a lot of people, and I have no criticism of those who want that. I want something very different. It's just how I was raised. It's kind of how I operate, right? And so because of that, it pulls time away from the opportunity to have balance. And a friend of mine years ago said something that really stuck with me, in that he doesn't try and achieve balance, he tries to achieve harmony instead. And I think when you think about it in that framing of like, harmony is where the notes are all happening, but maybe one of them has more prominence for a period of time, and the other ones kind of play, still in synchronicity, but a little bit less prominent, and then others kind of move forward, but they're all always there. That feels more achievable for me. And so, I have small practices that I put in place. When I go to sleep, I sleep with my phone in a different room on airplane mode. So that's how I have my peace.
Nice job, R.N. Huffington.
Yeah. I mean, otherwise, like, I'm going to grab my phone and come up with an idea and work on it. And I do a lot of times, but, as long as I'm home, my phone is separate. And then, I get up and feed the babies first thing in the morning. And I try everything in my power to not have my phone in my hand. It's hard because, like, I want to be getting through emails, but I'm thinking, this is the 1 hour in the morning that I have with my child.
Yeah.
And then when I go to work, like, I'm focused. I mean, I'm real focused. And then, I come home, I'm exclusively with them for a few hours, and then I get back on the computer and I do some email and, work and whatnot, usually late at night, and, time with my wife, obviously, in between.
But it's not balanced. It's like,
No, it's not.
That's the thing that I keep coming back to.
And it's hard, but I think the key is to make sure that the notes that you want to experience most in your life are at the highest end of that harmonic frequency.
Yeah, and you can be good at one thing, and you can have something else playing in the background. You can be really great at something, and then step away from that thing and be great at something else. But you just can't be great at all the things all the time.
Yeah,
Whether
and
it's
you
personal,
just have to decide.
family, professional. Yeah.
I mean, mine right now, there's 3 things that I really would like to prioritize. It's time with my family, it's building MissionU, and it's personal health. And the truth is, I think in the last 6 months, I've done a really good job at optimizing for the first 2, and my health isn't as great. Like, I don't work out as consistently as I would like. And, it's because literally tonight I have to decide between a 7:30 p.m. pickup basketball game or time with my kids. And the same thing, Friday mornings, there's an 8 a.m. game, and there's on Wednesday mornings a 7 a.m. run at UCSF. And it's like, I haven't played in those games in months because I'm going to prioritize being with my kids. Yeah. And I hate that I'm not treating my health as the top priority, and I know that's the wrong thing to do. But if it's taken away from time with my kids and I have such limited time with them, I need to make that decision now, and at some point, I'll be able to, get to better allocation.
Well, that's what I love, because you just highlighted all the competing ideas, and people talk about balance, and I don't know anyone who does anything as hard as you do what you do, or anyone who's been on this show, who's sat in that chair, has done it,
I'm sure.
that feels content with the relationships that they have relative to their professional ambition, relative to...
I think the only time that you feel that way is when you've really hit that kind of plateau where, like, things are going fine, and you're frankly not all that needed in the business. Like, it's moving, and the operators, the executives are like really maintaining it. And right around that time is when if you have the DNA that we have, go, I want to work on something new, so that, like, you get back in that flow. And I had great, like, balance, the kind of last year that I was running Pencils of Promise, but I was itching for
6 years of crazy grind, and then you had caught a year's worth of balance.
For sure.
Actually, that was an interesting transition that you made without my prompting to, like, some of the things that you do day to day. I like habits. I'm a habit freak, because if I don't set some boundaries, it's like my roadmap.
Yeah.
What are some of yours?
So that one
phone thing is great.
Phone on airplane mode when I sleep is really, really critical for me. It's like a big game changer. And I've done it for probably 4 or 5 years now. I would say a second is when I wake up in the morning, before I ever grab my phone, I go and lean in the opposite direction, and I acknowledge my wife in some capacity, whether it's just like an arm on the shoulder or something small. I focus my energy, my time, my well-being is going to be connected to her before I connect to the flood of emails and technology, and it just changes the dynamic of my day. Because if I go straight to the phone, it's like, all right, this is going to be stress, and that's fine. But if I start with her, it's like, okay, here's the foundation. And then, I mean, certainly, time focused with the kids in the morning. Then I tend to do like either phone calls or whatnot from home first thing, like starting around 8:30, and then I head into the city, for work and whatnot. And then another one for me is that when the weekend comes, this was a family tradition I've always had, but like we light candles on Friday nights and we have a dinner as a family, and we're Jewish, so it's Shabbat, but just that moment to just stop and kind of be grateful for the week that you've had, all the ups and downs, and then be present with your family and friends and loved ones is a really important ritual. And then the last one for me is I write. I have a journal in my bag at all times, and anywhere between, let's say, every other day and maybe once a month, I'll find time and I just write. And I don't write for anybody to ever read it. My expectation is no one will ever read any of the dozens of journals that I've filled up, but it's my opportunity to get out my essential truth. And there's just a lot of personal realizations and breakthroughs and honesty.
What's the mechanism? Like, do you give yourself 5 minutes? Do you write whenever you're inspired? Because sometimes if you're busy as shit, you don't get quite so inspired.
I would say,
what are some of the rules?
If I was to look at most of the journal entries, I'd say more than 50% that I've written in the last 5 years are written on airplanes. So I don't connect to Wi-Fi on flights. That's another big thing for me. I mean, probably like you, I travel all the time.
I was on a flight this morning.
Yeah. So I don't connect to Wi-Fi on flights unless it's like absolutely essential. I mean, when we were launching MissionU and I was flying around the week leading up to it, probably 3 times I connected. Yeah. One of them was a flight to Singapore, so it was like 20 hours or whatever, 16 hours.
This is some valuable time.
Yeah. But in general, I don't connect to Wi-Fi on flights. It's the time for me to decompress a little bit, and I usually create content then. So if it's some materials for the organization, a presentation, but I usually end up writing. And I write until I feel like my cup is full. So I reflect on usually family-related stuff, but I also really try not to write the here's what I did and here's what I experienced. It's not the what. It's really the kind of interpersonal depth of experience and emotions and feelings, and getting to what do I actually really believe right now, and what do I want to do to improve the next whatever week or month or years. And that's usually what I write. And it can be anywhere from 3 pages to like 7 to 8 pages, but these are kind of like leather bound journals, like that big.
Small pages.
Yeah, they're not big.
So is one of the things that you write about some of the things that are challenging you?
Oh, always.
All right, let's figure that out. Like, we've talked a lot about great opportunity. Mm-hmm. You've been able to follow your dreams on a couple different paths. Mm-hmm. You're around people that you love. Yeah. If you're sitting at home right now, you're like, wow, Adam's really got his shit together. This looks great. It looks great from the outside. Yeah. But we all know that the stories we tell, we sit down here in interviews, and you've done enough of them. I've done millions, just like you, that your highlight reel, people are at home comparing them to their day-to-day lives. Yeah. So what are some things you're struggling with that you could share with us?
Sure. I think this question of am I willing to miss anything in my kids' lives is a big one for me right now. Very personal anecdote, but about 2 weeks ago, so first of all, maybe 2 months ago, my son Dylan rolled over for the first time, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but like as a parent, each of these milestones are a really big deal. Like they're not talking yet, so like rolling, literally pushing themselves and flipping over is like a big deal. And usually babies do it around 3-4 months, and my son Dylan is just a little tank, and he did it 2 months. And I was away, and I missed it, and I was really like a little heartbroken, right? Like, I wish I was there for it. And my daughter Bayla, I got a text from my wife about 2 weeks ago, and she was like, Bayla rolled over, and she sent me basically the tail end of the video where like she had just kind of flipped over. And I had the biggest smile on my face, but there was genuinely a part of me that like wanted to cry. I really felt so sad that I had missed this moment in both, not just one, but both. And with twins, it's like double in so many ways on the emotional spectrum that there was this part of me that was like, I can't miss these other things, right? So that's one thing I'm really struggling with is how do I, craft the career that I want, which includes, public speaking. I mean, like you, I do a lot of it, and probably like you, it's not just because it moves things in a positive way for your business, but I hope I say this humbly, but like you put me on a stage, and I know I can change people's lives in that room. Yeah. Not in a small way, like the whole trajectory of their life. Yep. Can and will change, and it's not everybody.
With a couple of ideas. But handful of people, handful of ideas.
If it's a 300 to 400 person room, somewhere between 3 and 12 people in that room, their life will change. And I get the emails every day. Yeah, like somewhere between 3 and 7 or 8 emails, because AdamandIpromise.org is in the back of my book, and most talks I give, it's like just reach out and contact me, and I value that, right? But that also means I need to be away from my family. And I have this creeping up desire right now to write a second book, which I haven't felt in years. I just wanted to write the story of Pencils of Promise and the lessons learned. But now, just seeing what's happening and this higher education space, I want to write this book about essentially, the reinvention of the American dream, because the American dream stood for something. For a long time, it was created in 1931 by a guy named James Truslow Adams in a book called The Epic of America, which I own 2 copies of.
Nice.
And it's really hard to find, but it's this 1-volume history of the United States, literally back to when most of the continent was covered by trees. And he codified this idea of the American dream, and it shifted recently, and I want to write about that. But as you put out content, and you need to travel to go spread the word around it oftentimes. So that's a big one for me, is how do I reconcile my professional ambitions with my desire to be present, physically present with my family. And it will continue. I've told my wife, I plan on coaching all their sports teams. I want to be that dad, right? My dad coached a lot of my sports teams, and my wife's pick one sport. You can't coach them all. And I'm like, it's 6th grade. Nobody is that good anyway. It's not like you have to be.
You're not going to jeopardize someone's college career at 6th grade.
There's not pro soccer players coaching 5th grade, soccer in Umbro shorts and orange peels. So you have to build your business to a certain place where you can be present for those type of things, and so that's a big one that I would say definitely, challenged by. And then a second one is really just this idea that the system that I really want to challenge is one that's so incredibly complex, and it so well. Education is not transactional
at all.
It's really just such a human experience, and inevitably there'll be challenges ahead. There'll be blowback. There'll be stuff that doesn't work out perfectly, because you can't just inject somebody and they're educated, right? You need to really foster that experience, and that's a daunting prospect, but it's one that certainly I want to take on.
Something where the problem is so big that it's hard to figure out where to start.
Right.
And then probably you got to just start digging the ditch wherever you're at right now. Just start digging, because it's all gonna go to the good side of the story. So before we wrap up, just a couple random. I'd like to finish with some randoms. What are you doing culturally right now? You have some music that you're excited about? Do you have some films you're excited about, or is some and all focus on the home is actually totally fair. You're 4 months into being a dad. But this ends up being a great. We've hosted amazing musicians on the show before, and I like to keep a pulse on culture. Some of my friends are listening to, or
honestly, lately, because I have about a 30-minute commute every day, I've been listening to a lot of podcasts. So right now, I'm in the midst of S-Town, which is really good. It's the #1 podcast in the podcast store. It's by the Serial Creators. I just wrapped up Missing Richard Simmons, which is also wildly entertaining and fascinating.
Wild, right? I haven't listened or watched.
That was really good.
I saw some press around it. It was crazy.
It was great. So that's kind of on the podcast front. Let's see, on the music side, I'm still kind of cycling through a lot of my classic, a lot of Radiohead, a lot of Jack White, but I just went to see this guy named Davey Knowles, really good rock and roll blues musician.
Cool.
Who's
Here
great.
in the city?
We're
in San Francisco.
Out in Marin.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, played my local venue.
Wow, that's right. You're in Marin. You came in. Thanks for coming all the way in here.
Oh no, our office is in the city, so I'm here every day.
Where are you guys, roughly?
We're about a block and a half from Union Square.
Oh, nice.
So not too far.
Investors?
Yeah.
You like to talk about them? Don't like to talk about them?
I'm fine with that.
Sure.
We raised our seed round back in October 2016. First Round Capital is our lead investor, so by all accounts, premier investor to have at this stage. For the top education investment funds, and then a whole bunch of just really incredible angels. People who had built great businesses, people who kind of saw what we were creating and believed in it long term.
Yeah. What about I have a tough time, this is a personally motivated question, I have a tough time identifying with ed tech. People say, CreativeLive, and then I'm always the black sheep at any education conference, or if I'm on a panel. If I'm on a panel, I'm sitting next to these, and there it's all about measurement, and how do you process outcomes and what's, and I'm like, people watch our stuff for 3 hours at a time.
Yeah.
22 minutes is the average time you spend on CreativeLive on a mobile device per session. So we focus on engagement, helping people tap into their passions, and it's so out of whack with all of the other stuff. So how do you reconcile? Do you try and reconcile those? Or are you just Adam from MissionU, and or is it too new for you?
I've been in the education space for a while now, and I never considered myself, I would never self-identify as I'm an education
entrepreneur
wonk or whatever. I'm also not an educator personally. And I'm very upfront about that. I'm an entrepreneur who believes in the value of education, and so I try and build organizations and companies that can have transformative impact there. But in general, there's usually kind of three audiences that are going to interact with your company or your service. There's the kind of consumers, in our case, that's like parents and students and teachers, in high schools and guidance counselors and whatever else. Then there's the other side, the businesses, right? And then there's your industry people. And the two that I really value, and it's important to acknowledge the importance of all three. But I can tell you this past week, this article came out in Inside Higher Ed that was titled, "Here's Why This Traditional Academic Welcomes MissionU," because a different article was written about us in a different publication that was a really great profile, but in it they interviewed some traditional academics, and one of them said, "I can tell you that traditional academics will hate this with a passion." So this was this guy's counter saying, "I'm a traditional academic and I actually believe in it." And this whole Twitter war started, and all these traditional academics were kind of challenging basically what we were building, and I just decided to kind of poke my head in the ring and basically shared where I stand, right? And so, my gut tells me there's so much that's being done in K through 12 that tends to be I think the type of folks you're talking about. Right now, the higher education space kind of feels like the Wild West. From what I'm gathering. And it's a really exciting place to be. I wouldn't want to be focused in K-12 right now, because it's a lot of former teachers that are building products, but they're not, again, entrepreneurs at heart, and they have the best of intentions. That's one thing that's really cool to see. Everybody in the space has the best of intentions.
And they do know what needs to be built, but they don't know how to build it well. I don't know, there's a weird conundrum happening.
But the higher ed space, most of the people that I've met thus far, I like them. It's definitely a little bit feels like the Wild West, because everybody acknowledges that it needs to shift, and so there's a lot of people with a lot of backgrounds coming into it, and I'm just happy to be a part of it.
Especially when there's that much money at play.
Right.
There's so much money, so much opportunity for disruption. There's not going to be a one winner take all situation.
Not at all.
There's going to be so many different flavors. Awesome. So last question. Is there anything that people would be surprised to know about you, that if you this is something that most people wouldn't know, that if you told them, they would be surprised? No way. That would need to be need to be the moment that people are sitting. I'm like, no way! I would have never guessed that.
Man, I'm trying to think of what people would be absolutely shocked with. Here's the truth. I'm naturally very introverted. When people learn that, they're like, nah, that's not true, because they've either seen me.
You write books.
They see me speaking at an event, right? And they're like, oh, you seem really natural on stage. And here's a perfect one. I was so nervous about public speaking for so many years that my family physician had to prescribe a beta blocker for me, which is basically a pill that allows your nerves not to become overcome by the adrenaline that it can't handle. For basically, call it 2007 to 2009, if I had to give a presentation in front of 4 people I worked with at Bain, I wouldn't sleep for weeks in advance. And so anyone that believes that public speaking is something that you have to be born with, it's not true at all. I'm case in point of somebody who could not have been more nervous about the notion of public speaking probably the first dozen times I did it. And now I'm give me 2,000 people in a state. Great, let's go. And it's actually part of the core curriculum at MissionU. Is the first quarter is 8 hard skills, and one of them is public speaking, because I really believe it can be caught.
I'm going to pull on that a little bit more, because that's just too good, because it is such a big fear for. So what's your mindset when you go into public speak?
The mindset has to be.
Do you memorize? Do you have slides?
No.
Do you memorize? Is it all from the heart? You have 3 main points.
I have slides. I don't memorize anything. I've given some college commencement addresses, and they were like, the president would like to see your remarks. And I was like, well, there are no remarks. I'm going to create notes on a note card literally in the hour leading up, and then I'll put it on and I'll talk from there. So, my advice for people is, 1, speak about something that you know. you get really nervous when you're speaking about stuff that you don't know that well because you feel like the imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And when I was at Bain and I had to speak about industries where I wasn't necessarily an expert, but I'd learned a lot in 3 weeks, I was always worried they're going to kind of see through the holes. But if you have to give a presentation about what you did on Friday night, that's a lot easier because you know it.
Yeah.
And so, one, speak about content that you actually know, and particularly if you've lived it, it's even easier. I think the mindset needs to be that you are just telling a story to a friend. And I really focus on eye contact when I talk in front of rooms. You can kind of tell the person that's like kind of wandering around and not actually making eye contact with anybody. I'll in the first 5 or 10 minutes of any talk, it's pretty clear there'll be someone that's like really locked in and jazzed about what I'm saying, and I try and speak to them. I mean, I'll look around at different people, but if you can basically, before you get up on that stage or that podium or whatever it is, not think about, oh my God, I have to address 200 people, and instead be like, I'm just going to tell a story to a friend of mine. I find that it makes it much easier. And then the last thing is basically know exactly what you're going to say in your opening and know exactly what you're going to say in your closing line. And everything else can meander. But I've seen people give great speeches and then they kind of fumble the finish.
Yeah.
And they leave feeling disappointed.
You've
and
seen that in a movie and it never goes well when you
exactly.
fumble.
So, especially when I used to be super nervous, I'd get up there and the first thing I'd say is, hi, my name is Adam Braun and I'm the founder of Pencils of Promise Nowadays. Hi, I'm Adam Braun. I'm the founder of MissionU. And it just kind of allows me to feel like I'm introducing myself the same way that I would to someone that I would meet at a cafe or a restaurant. And then it's a familiar talk, and then I know my closing line, and everything in between you can figure your way out through.
Thanks, bud.
Hey, it was a pleasure.
You guys, Adam Braun, check it out. MissionU. What are your coordinates at MissionU?
So just missionu.com is the website.
Okay.
Anybody can email me at any point in time, adam@promise.org. And then we're on social media for everything, just at MissionU, MISSIONU.
Good luck getting one of those 25 spots if you're one of the thousands of applicants. And we'll see you next week for another show.